News Live talk show, bringing you interviews with Reiki wisdom holders and stories of hope and healing from around the world. I'm Stephen Vandiver, your host. The focus on Reiki is to spotlight one of the world's fastest growing self-care, spiritual, and personal development tools. Everyone can learn this calming, relaxing, and healing technique and channel universal life force energy. As we come to know that our universe and everything around us, including our physical bodies, is made entirely of energy, learning to effectively work with this energy is key. Reiki is a priceless addition to your personal spiritual development toolbox. Our guest tonight is Ann Baldwin, PhD. Dr. Baldwin is professor of physiology and psychology at the University of Arizona, a top Reiki researcher, consultant, and Holy Fire II Karuna Reiki master teacher. She's practiced Reiki on people and animals for the last 15 years. Among her many activities and duties, Dr. Baldwin heads the research staff at the Center for Reiki Research, founded by William Lee Rand, where research studies are reviewed and conducted. Ann's research focuses on the physiological effects of mental and emotional stress, and she's currently exploring the efficacies of Reiki and of biofeedback techniques in reducing the damaging effects of stress. She's published over 120 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals and has been a member of several review panels for National Institutes of Health. With her Reiki training and extensive scientific background, Ann hopes to bridge the gap between energy healing and quantitative scientific inquiry. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Doctor.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'd love to start out to hear how you came to Reiki. Tell us how it all began for you.
Well, it's a long story, a long and strange story. So I was a full-time professor of physiology at the University of Arizona, and I was doing experiments on rats. And I was studying effects of these new blood substitutes that had been developed by various companies to use instead of regular blood for transfusions, because at that time, they thought the blood was contaminated because of the HIV virus. So I was injecting these various types of blood substitutes into the rats to test them, to see if they were causing damage or if they were safe. And I found, in fact, that these blood substitutes were causing inflammation in the intestines of the rats. And when I just injected saline as a control, there was no inflammation. Well, then I moved my lab. I was at the VA hospital in Tucson at that time. It was very quiet and nice to work in, and not many people working on animals. And there was just one person looking after the rats, and it was all very nice. Then I moved to the University of Arizona, and my experiments didn't work anymore. So not only did the blood substitutes rats show inflammation, but the controls just injected with saline showed inflammation as well. And the only thing that had changed was where I was keeping the rats. I went down there and stayed there a few hours just to see what it was like in this facility where I was keeping my animals. And I found it was way, way more noisy than the VA facility. There were people banging doors, opening, closing doors, many people coming in, many more animals, machines starting and stopping, keys jangling. And I thought, well, maybe the rats are getting stressed by this noise, because I was feeling stressed by that noise. And so I did an investigation, and I found that, yes, it was the noise that was causing the inflammation. So then I said, I need a quiet room for my animals. So I got a special quiet room for my animals. But we were interested by this effect of stress on the rats. And at that time, I was looking for a new technician to help me with data analysis. And I hired somebody who was a Reiki master. And I'd never heard of Reiki before. I had no idea what Reiki was. But she was very persuasive, and she wanted to teach me Reiki. And so we went to her house. I went, and a postdoc and 2 technicians went, and a student, and she taught us Reiki. And she said, why don't we do Reiki on the rats and see inflammation that they get from the stress? So I actually applied to the NIH, National Institutes of Health, and I got a grant, I think it was $250,000, to study the effects of Reiki on the rats. And so we got people who were Reiki practitioners to come and give the rats 15 minutes of Reiki a day in this stressful environment. And so one group of rats got Reiki, one group of rats got sham Reiki, which meant that someone who was not trained in Reiki just sat with the rats. And then one group had no other treatment. And we found that the rats who got the Reiki, only the rats that got the Reiki, the inflammation went away. So I was quite amazed that this Reiki could stop inflammation in rats, because rats, they are not biased. Apparently they don't have any opinions about whether the Reiki is working or not. And so it was very powerful that the Reiki did show a significant reduction in the inflammation in rats. So that's what started me.
Great. Now, what year was this Reiki study on the rats?
That was, I think it was like 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about 17 years ago. And then
Yeah.
what did that lead to as far as scientific research on your part as far as Reiki goes?
Well, that study, we had 2 papers published on that study in peer-reviewed journals. And then after that, I decided I would rather work on humans than on rats. And partly it was because I thought that, working with humans the rats themselves, I mean, they provided a very good model, but I thought that human research with Reiki would be more applicable in the real world. So I made a big decision. So it was Reiki that made me make this huge decision to give up my tenure, give up my full-time appointment at the university. And I still kept an affiliation with the university, and I'm working there now with 30% time. But I started my own business, Mind Body Science. And I did that because I felt that it would allow me to do my research on Reiki and to work on Reiki more effectively than staying at the university. Because at that time, I felt ostracized. People would say things like, oh, well, she used to be a good scientist. What happened to her? Now she's doing this kind of weird Reiki stuff. So, Reiki completely turned around my life in that way. So then I did get grants from other sources to do my Reiki experiments. Unfortunately, the NIH stopped funding the Reiki studies pretty much after that initial start. And so it's very difficult to get. I sent in 3 proposals and they were all rejected after the rat study, even though it had been very successful. So then I found other sources to fund the research, and this time we were working with humans.
Very good. Now, how did you get when and how did you get connected up with William Lee Rand?
Well, I can't remember the exact date, but it was a long time ago, over 10 years ago, I think. And he just phoned me out of the blue and said, hey, I have this Reiki Foundation, International Center for Reiki Training, and I teach Reiki. And I want to develop this Center for Reiki Research. And I know that you've done research in Reiki. How would you like to be part of it? So I thought that sounded like a good idea. And so I joined the Center for Reiki Research, which is still going. There's a group of us, and we discuss Reiki research. My job is to go through all the studies that appear in peer-reviewed journals, or the original scientific research done on Reiki. And then, so I find the studies, and then I assign people in our group to evaluate those studies using processes that we put together initially when this group started. Let me think, standardized questions that we go through to see how the research is evaluated. Looking at the standard of research, did they include control groups? Did they use Reiki practitioners with the top level training, that kind of thing? So we analyze all the research, and then we summarize these studies and put them up on the website, which is centerforreikiresearch.org, Center for Reiki Research org. And so you can find every single publication on Reiki Research, original Reiki Research that has been published in peer-reviewed journals. It's all up there. And there are actually 72 studies up there right now that we've found. So it's a good way for people to find out what's happening with Reiki in the scientific world and see what Reiki supports right now, what the Reiki research supports.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I communicated with Dr. Trent a little bit. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and didn't she? She was lead on the large scale.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is another kind of study that we're doing. So we thought rather than just having do Reiki experiments in labs, which is kind of a little bit artificial. We would just see if we could get people who normally do Reiki, and these people were trained in the International Center for Reiki Training, William Rand's center. They were all trained there, so they're all trained in the same way. And they are out in the community practicing Reiki. And so we set up a system whereby they could ask their clients if they would like to be included in some research. And then they would do before and after questionnaires to see how the people were affected by their treatment. And so asking questions like, how anxious were you before and after on a scale of 1 to 5, that kind of thing. So very simple things that a non-scientist can do, but very standardized. And Natalie is, she's written a rough draft of that, and we're hoping to get that published soon. So we have all the results from, I think we have about 1,000 Reiki practitioners, or 1,000 sessions that we have data on. And this is not but people working in the community doing Reiki, and that way we can see how effective is that on these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to mention, I did put the link for the Center for Reiki Research. You can go there to get to the research papers. You're required to get a username and password, but there's no cost for it. So you just register and you'll be able to see these studies. And with regard to the study that Dr. Trent has done, there is some information on there for it, some demographic information, some initial information on the effectiveness and the responses of the participants. But I guess with the full study, there'll be a lot more information coming out.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, since William called you out of the blue, have you had the opportunity to take training with his organization?
Oh yes, I did Karuna Reiki training with him in Glastonbury. So we visited Stonehenge. It was for our attunement. It was pretty amazing. Yes.
Right. And you're from the UK, yeah?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So how did we get so lucky to steal you away across the pond?
Well, I did my PhD in London at Imperial College, and then when it was time to get a job, it was a really bad time in England. It was in the 80s, early 80s, and there was just no work. There's nothing. And my PhD advisor, he had introduced me to a lot of American people who'd come to give seminars and talks in our department. And so I had all their information. So I wrote to them. This was before email. And I got 5 job offers in the US. So the choice between 0 and 5 was kind of overwhelming, and that I must come to the States. So I went to Columbia University and worked there.
There you go. Yeah, that's what they call statistically significant, right?
Between 0 and 5.
Excellent. And now you mentioned something on your website about heart math, and I know this ties in together. Can you explain what heart math is?
Yes, the Institute of Heart Math is based in Boulder Creek, California, and they have developed programs and technology to help people basically tune into their heart rhythm, and even get advice from their heart. And seeing as we have the technology, we can see how various ways of feeling and breathing affect your heart rhythm. Not your heart rate, but how the heart rate changes with time. That's kind of more complex than just the average heart rate. You can see how your heart rate changes second by second, and the way that it changes, the pattern that it changes, reflects your emotions, basically. So your emotions don't just stay with you, they are broadcast from your heart, because the Institute of Heart Math has done a lot of research looking at the heart field, because the heart is an electrical organ. Electric currents flow through the heart, and if you have a current, then that creates an electromagnetic field. So the heart is creating a field that can stretch out like even up to 12 feet from you. So there's this big field stretching out that your heart is creating, and the vibrations of this field reflect your heart rate variability, which reflects your emotions. So if you're in what's called a coherent or balanced state, then your field vibrates at about 6 cycles per minute, and very steady vibration. Whereas if you're feeling angry or frustrated, then it's just all over the place. It's not a nice steady rhythm. It just is many, many frequencies all bundled together. So that's basically what they study, and and they've developed programs so that people can learn how to tune into the heart, and even if they can control it. They can control it so that what you send out from your heart is what you want to send out.
Wow. So this is really a technique that you're able to teach people.
Absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very nice. Now, when you're researching these physiological effects of stress, how do you go about putting all that together in a study?
Okay, so it's very important that the study is robust, meaning that first of all, it can be reproduced, it can be repeated by somebody else. So you have to make sure that your methods that you use are very systematic and always the same. And when you write your paper, you clearly state every single phase of your methods so that another person can repeat it. It's also important to have a control group, because if you just have one group and say you measure let's say you're measuring the heart rate variability before a Reiki session and after a Reiki session, and maybe it will change. Maybe they become more coherent after the Reiki. Well, we don't know that was necessarily the Reiki. It could be just, the passage of time. They just got more comfortable sitting, in the place where you're making the measurements, and maybe that made them more coherent. So that's why it's important to have a control group that does not receive Reiki. So you can have a group that maybe they're just sitting there and they're not receiving a Reiki session. Maybe you need another group too, where a person is pretending to give them Reiki. It's called sham Reiki. So the person is not trained in Reiki at all, doesn't know anything about Reiki. In fact, we've used accountants as our sham Reiki people. And they just sit with the client, and the client doesn't know whether they're receiving real Reiki or not. And that's called a blinded study. Yeah, so you have to make sure that the science is robust, and that you're using reproducible techniques, and also what you're measuring has to be established too. So things like blood pressure, heart rate variability, they're very well established and tested. But maybe someone comes up with this machine, and this has happened to me. They say, okay, this machine measures Reiki. I say, okay, how do you know it measures Reiki? Oh, because we've done Reiki on it and you can see the needle move. Okay, so I've been given some of these devices to test myself. And unfortunately, every one I've been given to test, I see that you can make the needle move not just by Reiki. You can make the needle move by breathing on it, or by putting your hands close to it but not doing Reiki. So you really have to be measuring what you say you're measuring. So it's important to use a technique or a device that has been tested and calibrated, so that you really do know that what you're testing is what you say you're testing.
Absolutely. And now, you were telling me the other day about a knee surgery study.
Yeah. So At that time, I was working with Eric Pearl, who does reconnective healing, and he's director of the Reconnection. And he funded me to do this study. That was the shoulder study. The reconnective healing was the shoulder study. So you're talking about the knee study. The knee study was done a little bit later, and this was done in a hospital in the Northeast, and it was done on patients who were undergoing knee replacement surgery. So I think we had in the end about 46 patients, and they were in 3 groups. One group would receive Reiki before surgery, and 24 hours after surgery, 48 hours and 72 hours after surgery if they were still there. The second group would receive sham Reiki, fake Reiki, and the third group just standard care. And we wanted to see if the Reiki significantly reduced the pain they were experiencing before and after the surgery, and their anxiety levels, their blood pressure, their need for medication, and how long they stayed in the hospital. And we found that we did the statistics on the results, and we found that it was only the real Reiki that significantly reduced their pain, their anxiety, their blood pressure, their medication usage, and how long they stayed in hospital. So that was a small study, so we need to repeat it. And so we're on a clinical trial with 100 people per group rather than just like 17 or something. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, going back a little bit about the stress and really studying stress a bit, and having techniques that you can teach people to deal with this and to work with this. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you foresee for, say, company programs or really getting the information out?
Yes. So I do Reiki, and I also do biofeedback, as you said. And the biofeedback mainly is using the heart math programs, because I found that they are really the most effective, in my opinion, at helping people reduce stress. So what you're doing is not affecting the stress. The stress is still there, but you affect how people respond to the stress. So I do both the heart math techniques, which focuses on your breathing, because just breathing has a huge effect on your heart rate variability and on your stress levels. I'm sure everyone knows that if you just take a deep breath and then go, that automatically relaxes you. That out breath relaxes you, because it reduces what's called the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, just breathing out like that. So if you breathe more slowly and deeply, it significantly reduces your stress response. So a simple thing like that will help with controlling your stress response. And then another thing is that Heart Math developed is instead of dwelling on things that are upsetting or negative, that you just bring to your mind or bring to your heart something that gives you pleasure, something very simple that gives you pleasure, that you can sense. So I imagine I'm stroking my cat. That will do it. Just imagine I'm stroking my cat and how soft his fur is, how warm he is, how nice the purr is. And that alone will put me into that balanced, coherent state. So it's very simple, but people don't know anything about it. They really don't. Most people don't even know that breathing can hugely affect how you cope with your stress. And then, of course, Reiki. And Reiki really combines very well with the biofeedback, and especially with the breathing. Because Dr. Usui, he did a simple meditation with his students called the Gasho meditation. And Gasho, the word Gasho means putting your hands in prayer position. Yeah, exactly. And so when he did that with his students, he asked them to breathe in the Reiki through the crown down to then just below their navel, and then breathe it out and imagine the Reiki's coming up through their body and out through their crown. So back and forth. He asked them to do it very slowly. And that is actually how you need to breathe in order to reduce your stress. So he knew that. And in fact, the HeartMath devices, the biofeedback devices, which hook up onto your ear and measure your heart rhythm and then display this on the computer, if you breathe like that, you can see immediately that you go into that coherent state. So there's a very good connection between Reiki energy and just breathing. So you can do the breathing and get coherent, but if you're also running real Reiki energy through you, that really makes it even more beneficial. It amplifies it. So it's a great combination of doing the breathing and using the technology to see how that affects your heart rhythm, your heart rate variability, plus learning to do Reiki, so you're actually breathing Reiki in and out.
That's beautiful. Now, with stress, what does science know about the effects of stress unhandled, and the importance of being not in that fight or flight, but in a relaxed, coherent state?
Yeah, so stress has deleterious effects on all your bodily systems. So your heart, for sure, that's one of the risk factors for heart disease or even heart attack. And that's, stress. And then also the stress impairs your immune system as well. And it can impair it in several ways. Sometimes it can stop your immune system from working properly so that you can't fight off infections very well. Just simple stress is doing that. And I'm sure you've been in a situation where you're feeling stressed, and that's when you catch the bug that's going around or the cough that's going around, right?
Right.
Because the immune system isn't working very well. So what happens is that when you get stressed, then neurotransmitters are released, which then affect the function of the immune cells. They bind to active binding sites of the immune cells and stop them from working properly. Reduce the number of immune cells and reduce the number of antibodies they can release. And even stress can even make some of these immune cells commit suicide and kill themselves. So stress affects the immune system. Another way it can affect the immune system is it can cause autoimmune diseases, where instead of just fighting off infections, the immune system starts damaging your own tissue. So an example of that would be fibromyalgia or inflammatory bowel disease or arthritis, where the stress is causing inflammation over activity of the immune system, so it's fighting and breaking down your own tissues. So that's another way that stress can have deleterious effects on the body. So immune system, heart, and if it affects the heart, it's also going to affect the brain, because the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. So going back to the heart rate variability, if the heart rate is varying in this crazy way, as it would if you were angry or fearful a lot of the time, that information is sent through the nervous system to the brain, and it actually impairs your thought processes, so you can't remember things so well. You can't think clearly, like you have fuzzy thinking. It's difficult to concentrate. So stress does that too.
Yes, and so the importance of bringing the body into a state of relaxation so that the body can heal and reverse all these negative effects.
Yeah, and everyone gets upset and frustrated and angry, of course. But if you can train yourself to do Reiki or do the breathing or focus on something more positive, what that does is that you do get just as angry as everybody else, and your body does respond, but you can get back down to a normal state much more quickly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, also on your website, I see you do equine therapy, and I know there's a tie-in there with Reiki. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so horses, they are very sensitive to energy. They, in fact, a friend of mine, Linda Kohanoff, she has a ranch outside of Tucson, and she has some wonderful programs where she helps people explore themselves with horses. And she discovered that horses have multiple layers of energy fields, because I already talked about our field that is created mainly by the heart. The brain also creates a field, but the brain field is much smaller than the heart field. Horses, they have a huge field. And I'm talking about this, it's called a biofield. And what Linda discovered was she adopted this wild Mustang, and the wild Mustang wouldn't let her touch him. No way could she touch this wild Mustang. So she had to just stand by the wild Mustang a distance away. And she then started like stroking, but standing like 6 feet away, but stroking. And she noticed that the horse responded to her. The horse would take notice of her. And then she went a little bit closer and started stroking just the air, a little bit closer to the horse. And the horse looked at her. And eventually, after a few weeks of doing this, the horse actually let her touch him. And so horses are very, very sensitive to the fields. And as I said, the fields are in a layered structure. So the first field is even about 20 feet away from the horse. So you can be 20 feet away from a horse grazing in a field, and you can sense the field in your hands, especially if you're trained in energy healing of any kind. You can just breathe deeply and slowly, and you can feel the field in your hands. It's usually a kind of tingling sensation. And as you feel the field, the layer, you can kind of just knock on it. Hey, I'm here. And the horse will look up at you. The horse might be grazing, look up at you, and you're 20 feet away. So horses are very, very sensitive to energy. And so they also like Reiki. Most horses really love Reiki. And when you do Reiki on a horse, and you can just give Reiki a horse the same way as you would a person, I know there's a thing about asking permission before you give Reiki. Well, with a horse, you can, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So with a horse, you can ask if they want Reiki, and you can start the Reiki. And if they don't want Reiki, they will just walk away from you. If they do want Reiki, they will stay with you. So you are giving them a choice. They make their own choice. So if they don't want it, they'll just leave. But mostly they stay. And you can do Reiki on them from a distance or touching them. And you notice that when you give Reiki to them, they show classic signs of relaxation. So first of all, they put their head down. And then maybe they close their eyes. And maybe then they go, just a horse letting out the breath and releasing. So you know when your horse is really enjoying the Reiki.
Very good. Now, I've heard of some horses have been attuned to Reiki Master, so they actually give Reiki. Do you have that experience there?
I have not attuned a horse to Reiki, but I've heard of that other people do, and I can believe that because, as I said, they're very, very probably much more sensitive and knowledgeable about the energy than we are. So it doesn't surprise me one bit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you were telling me about a story of a lame horse that you were working on, doing volunteer work over therapeutic riding of Tucson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the vet had said that this horse was lame, and I wasn't sure which leg it was, but I thought, okay, it's when I just started Reiki, I'll just give the horse Reiki. So I rubbed my hands together to get them sensitive, and then I just put my hands down, not touching the leg, but close to each leg. The sensation in my hand, tingling sensation. I could kind of feel the field around the legs. And I got to one leg, I think it was the left hind, and instead of just feeling a field following the shape of the leg, it had a big bulge at the bottom. So I thought, this is strange. Maybe this is the lame leg. And so I was stooping. Actually, I was crouching. At his side. So, not in a dangerous place, but crouching to his side. And I was giving Reiki to that part of the leg where I found this bulge in the energy field. And I did that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then he put his nose down and gently nudged me, so I was knocked off balance. So I thought, that's strange. So I went back, started the Reiki again, and after about a minute, he did the same thing. He put his nose down and knocked me off balance. And I thought, maybe he's done, maybe he's finished. And so then when I went back the following week, they told me that the horse was up and going and lame anymore. So I don't know for sure, but my take on this is that he was telling me, okay, we're done now. Had enough, and I think we're done.
Very good. Yeah, and so he came up. He wasn't lame anymore, so that's right. Pretty amazing.
And I have another story too that I just thought of that was pretty amazing. So I had a client who asked me to do Reiki on his horse, and his horse was in a place where there are other horses, and there was a horse next door. So they're in these enclosures outside, like corrals, and they were placed next to each other, and they were quite sizable. So I was in the corral with his horse giving him Reiki, and there was a horse in the next one adjacent. And I noticed that the horse had kind of a big lump on one of his legs. And I said to my client, what's wrong with that horse? He said, well, the owner doesn't know. She's had all kinds of vets and no one really knows what's wrong with that horse. And he's just got this big lump on his foot and he's kind of lame. So anyway, I was focusing on my client's horse. And then I could see that other horse come up to us and just stand right next to us as I was giving this horse Reiki. And there's quite a lot of activity going on. There were people coming and going and bringing wheelbarrows and to and fro and bringing food along. So that horse had a lot to be distracted about, but that other horse just stayed with us. And then when I'd finished the Reiki on my client, that other horse just walked away. And so it really does seem as if that horse knew that I was doing a healing and just wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, that's a great story. I thought you were going to tell the one about the dogs. Will you tell that one too?
Yeah. Okay. So this again was when I just started Reiki, and being a scientist, I didn't really believe in the Reiki at first, but after the rat study and these various things that I'm telling you about that happened to me, all this evidence gradually accumulated, and I realized that it was real. But the dog story. So I had a friend with 3 dogs. And she said, oh, come and do Reiki on my dogs. So I said, okay, let's just try one at a time. So she brought in the first dog, and I sat in the room with him and gave him Reiki. And he seemed to like it. And then the next time I went, she brought in another dog. And this dog, didn't seem very sure about the Reiki, wasn't very familiar with it. But after a while, seemed to be quite at ease. And then the next time I went back, I said, okay, let's try the 3 dogs together. So she brought the 3 dogs in the room all together, and they were going crazy. They were running around, barking at each other. And I thought, oh, God, what have I let myself in for? So I just sat in the corner of the room, to the center of the room, with the intention that it should go to the dogs. And then we were videotaping this session. And within 7 minutes, those 3 dogs were lying in a circle asleep. So that was pretty amazing too.
Wow.
From rowdy barking dogs to forming a circle.
A sleeping circle.
Yes.
That's great. Well, you have a unique perspective, Doctor, because, coming from the scientific background, I'm sure that was a lot of basis there for skepticism of Reiki until you actually experienced it yourself. So how is your research presented into the medical community? How do you communicate with folks in the medical community to try to inform them about Reiki?
Well, that's why the Center for Reiki Research is so important, because we think that in order to have some backing, we need some scientific evidence, because people who are in the health field, they want results. It's no good saying, well, I had this story about this wonderful person, who had Reiki and then she was completely cured of her arthritic leg. That isn't going to convince them. People in the medical field want numerical evidence. They want data. So that's why we think the research is so important, so that we can provide data and say, yes, Reiki definitely does reduce anxiety, definitely does reduce blood pressure if your blood pressure is too high, definitely does reduce pain levels, because we have these data and we have done this experiment repeatedly in different conditions and different people, and we always get similar results. So that is one way that I'm trying to get Reiki more accepted in the medical field. Mm-hmm. And as you know, William, he has actually a while ago, William and some other people who were in the Center for Reiki Research, and Vital and Elise Brownell, we put together programs to be taken into hospitals so that we can educate people in charge of setting up programs in hospitals and convince them that it would be worthwhile to set up a Reiki program for patients in hospitals. So that's another way that we can spread the fact that Reiki is beneficial and will be good for patients. If we can get more and more programs set up in hospitals, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like the number of hospitals that have Reiki either through a volunteer program or, some have paid staff that provide Reiki treatments, that number's, growing rapidly. Do you keep track of that?
I haven't up-to-date data, but I think over 1,000 hospitals in the USA, and I'm talking about really high-prestige hospitals too, that have Reiki programs.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an article a week and a half ago or so that mentioned, I believe, Mayo Clinic and a hospital in Arizona. Might have been Flagstaff. So what I'm curious about then is, just a little bit more about, what makes Dr. Baldwin tick? What's exciting and what's new and up and coming for, Reiki Research or your work?
Well, right now I'm really tuning into the work with the horses. As I said, they know all about energy, and I recently, we recently got a publication accepted for one of our first first equine studies, and this was to do with energy too. So I have a colleague, Barbara Rector, and she and another colleague, Anne Alden, run this program called Adventures in Awareness, where people come and work with horses, interact with horses to become more aware of their own emotions. And so Barbara and Anne wanted me to do some research with the techniques that they use in their program. And one of the techniques they use is something called Konsu Permiso, which is with your permission, with the horse's permission. So how this works is that people go, they do what's called mutual choosing, which is it's not just them choosing a horse to work with, the horse is choosing them as well. So they learn how to be quiet and observe the horse and see, is the horse giving them a signal that that horse wants to work with them, as opposed to just they want to work with that horse. So they learn observations if that horse is drawn to them and they're drawn to the horse. So that's the first part. And then they learn how to feel the horse's field. I already talked about that. Feel the horse's energy field in their hands. And then they actually do what's called like a grooming. They're not actually grooming the horse's coat, but they're grooming the air around the horse, the field. And so we had them do that. That's what they do. And we wanted to see how it affected the heart rate variability of the person and the horse when this was happening. And we found that the heart rate variability of the person increased, which is healthy. The higher the heart rate variability, the more adjustable and adaptable the heart, and the healthier you are both physiologically and psychologically. So that went up. But the most interesting thing we found was that the frequencies of oscillation of the heart rate variability, the person shifted to the lower frequencies of the horse. The horse's heart is oscillating at very low frequency compared to the human. And we found that the human heart started to take on those exact same frequencies that the horse has. So they were really bonding heart to heart in a very precise way. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, that reminds me of I heard something about like metronomes that started at different times and then eventually
they come to the same frequency. Yeah.
So is that kind of that what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think so. So that's exciting, and that should be coming out in a week, I think. So it'll be interesting to see what we hear from other people.
Right. Now, can you talk a little bit more about therapeutic riding of Tucson? I know you do a lot of work there in the equine therapy. I'm sure you have some stories as well.
Oh, yes. So they work with a whole range of people. They do a lot of work with young children because it's been found that horses help children who have verbal problems speaking and autism, Asperger's, those kinds of emotional issues. And they're able to communicate with horses more easily than with humans. So it's a really nice way of helping them develop their communication skills in a non-judgmental way. So my job, I'm taking a break from trot right now because I'm writing a book on Reiki, but I've volunteered there for 10 years, and my job was horse handler. So I would lead the horse around, and there would be the child, usually a child, on the horse, and there would be two side walkers, one on each side, to make sure that the child was safe, and then there'd be the instructor who would decide what exercises that the child would do with the horse. And it's not just the session, it's just even the child loves to come to the horse and pet the horse and say goodbye to the horse. And it really helps them develop their communication skills in a non-threatening way. So that's one thing that Trot does. They also work with older people, and they also work with veterans. Many veterans have a huge benefit working with horses, especially ones who've experienced PTSD. Somehow or other, the horses just let them release those feelings that are tormenting them. It's quite amazing.
Wow, that is amazing. Absolutely.
And interestingly, tying in with this, what I was talking about, the person's heart, bonding with the horse's heart and reaching that very low frequency that the horse's heart vibrates at. It's been found that studies have shown that people who don't have very much of that very low frequency, they are more prone to PTSD. So it makes sense that if the horses are already operating at that very low frequency, working with them, and if that's being passed on to them, that may explain why they benefit so much from being around horses.
Now, would this indicate that the horse's field is much more powerful, therefore it wouldn't go the other way? The horse wouldn't take on the human's stress situation?
Well, in my research, I've been working with very calm horses. I haven't been working with horses that have been abused or traumatized in any way. So I can't answer that question. It could be that maybe traumatized horses can benefit from the human field. So that's more research that we need to do. I'm sure there are lots of anecdotal stories that traumatized horses benefit from humans caring, but it would be really good to see if the heart field of the human was affecting the heart field of the horse. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Now, talk about distance Reiki. I know it works because when I give someone a distance Reiki treatment, they give me feedback, and usually it's a number of sessions, so they're not just being nice, that kind of goes away. They're being honest, pretty quick. How does that work? How does distance Reiki work?
Nobody knows how it works, and actually scientifically right now there's very, very little evidence that it does work. So if you're just talking about the science, then there's nothing to support distance healing. But of course we have all the stories, and maybe not enough research has been done. In fact, very little research has been done on distance healing. But there are ideas of how it could work. And it really doesn't. And it's the kind of general agreement is that it doesn't just go across space. So if you have someone in one country sending Reiki to someone in America sending Reiki to someone in England, it's not going to travel like 6,000 miles across the ocean. I don't think so, because if that was the case, you would expect it to get very, very faint by the time it reached the person. And obviously it doesn't. So it doesn't seem to be crossing space. There are some experiments, not written up, but some experiments that have been done on an exploratory basis that indicate that it's not temporal either. You can actually send Reiki, seemingly you can send Reiki backwards and forwards in time as well. So it's not limited by time or space. That's what it seems like. So my idea, if I'm sending Reiki to somebody far away, my visualization is that we are both kind of tuning into this Reiki field, which is everywhere. It doesn't mean that my Reiki has to go 6,000 miles across to the other person. We're just tuning into the Reiki field, and it's like we're putting antennae up. So I'm putting my antenna up and they're putting their antenna up, and we're just in the field at the same time. So it doesn't have to go anywhere. It's just there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I imagine there'll be studies on that someday to show how it works. But there's so much that we don't know. We just go on our experience with it. Now, I did notice on your website you had a link for a labyrinth, and I saw labyrinth laid out. Talk a little bit about that. How you use the labyrinth. Oh
yeah. So I don't know. Oh, I do know. I remember now. A workshop in Flagstaff actually. It was an equine workshop, and they had a huge labyrinth there, and we had horses there, and they had an activity where you could choose to take a horse through the labyrinth. So I chose this kind of feisty horse who was kind of a little bit frisky, and I took this horse into the labyrinth, and it was a big labyrinth. Obviously it had to be big to have horses in it, and at one time there were like 6 horses at once in this labyrinth. So I was leading the horse through the labyrinth, and the minute we got into the labyrinth, that frisky horse calmed down, and we were just walking through the labyrinth until we got to the middle, and then we walked back again. And then when we got out of the labyrinth, he went back to his old frisky ways again. But just when we were in there, he was very calm. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. And I read more about labyrinths, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have one at home? So I designed one. So I thought I'd make it out of little, actually quite large stones, very smooth stones. And so I calculated how many tons of stones I needed. And there was a place in Tucson where I could order them from. And so I ordered all this truckload of stones, and the truck turned up at my home, and they were just going to dump them like outside the garage. And I said, no, you need to dump them where I'm going to build the labyrinth. And they said, oh, well, there's a wall in the way. And I said, never mind, just put the truck next to the wall and then just throw them over. And they said, well, we're not meant to do that. And I said, just do it. So they did. They just parked the truck by the wall and they threw the rocks over to where I was building the labyrinth. And then my husband helped me with this. He's actually a mathematician, and we calculated exactly how we had to lay it out with string first before we put the rocks down, the stones down. And so we had to calculate exactly the distance it had to be in order to get the whole labyrinth to fit in this area. And then it was a summer, like 2 summers ago, that was my project. And we built the labyrinth. And so I like to go there, especially in the evening, so really nice, quiet, meditative exercise to walk through the labyrinth. And then I used to have clients at home. Now I treat them somewhere else. But when they were at home, I sometimes would take them out into the labyrinth after a Reiki session and enjoy it.
Nice. So I'm sure everybody's wondering, did you have enough rocks? Did you calculate correctly?
I ordered a few too many, and so now we have little circles of rocks around other plants and trees and things. But I was pretty accurate. Okay. And that was due to my husband. As I said, he's a mathematician, so we could calculate exactly how many we needed.
Yeah, I would imagine it was accurate. So we've got a couple of minutes left here. What's up and coming for Reiki Research? What's the natural progression for these studies that are being done to introduce into the medical community?
Yeah, so I think really we need to come together. In fact, groups are coming together to decide, firstly, what do we need to do to help spread the fact that Reiki is beneficial psychologically and physiologically and get it more accepted. That's one way of going. The other way is trying to understand, finding out the mechanisms of Reiki. How does it work? And as a scientist, I'm really curious and I really want to know, how does it work? Lots of people, they don't care how it works. If it works, that's fine. They don't care. But I'm curious and I really do want to know how it works. I think the next thing is for people to come together and decide what would, maybe even how can we design apparatus or devices that could measure the Reiki energy. As I said, people have tried, and so far there hasn't been anything that's been that convincing. So we need to find something that really does measure the energy. If we can, that's what I think. But as I said, lots of people wouldn't agree with that. And also the next thing is to do these more large-scale clinical trials with large numbers of people. That way, I think that's going to be the best way to get more people involved in the Reiki and more people appreciating that it can help them, these large-scale clinical trials.
Very good. Yeah, I'd love to participate in a trial. I missed out on the one Dr. Trent was doing there. So then what's up with you? What's up and coming for you? You talked a little bit about the book. When can we expect that?
Oh, okay. So I was invited to write a book on Reiki for clinical practitioners, for clinical practitioners, because right now there really isn't one out there. So that's what my project is coming up. I'll be working on that. So putting together really a practice book so that people who are in the medical field can see what they need to do to set up Reiki programs, what they need to do to provide Reiki to their patients and clients, and the best way to do it, how to make sure that the Reiki practitioners are of the highest level, etc. So that's what I will be doing.
Very good. Can you say who asked you to write the book or who commissioned you?
Yeah, it's Handspring Publications.
Oh, great, great. And it may be too soon to ask, but any idea when it might be available?
Well, I'm supposed to have it done by the end of the year, so maybe in 18 months or a couple of years, yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, we'll definitely look forward to that, and I'm sure we'll have you on the show, several times in between, or at least another time in between. What else is new and exciting in Arizona and with you?
Oh, in Arizona, well, right now the weather is great, but we're just enjoying the last part of spring, because we all know that when in June the inferno will start. Right now we're all enjoying time outside before we can't go outside anymore.
Right, before it's indoor for the whole.
And I like having a choice of when I go outside, because in the summer, if you haven't done your activities, physical activities by about 7 a.m., you're not going to be doing them that day. So it's nice right now to have a choice of time when I go outside and exercise.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show with us tonight, Dr. Baldwin. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've known about you and read the studies and have been on William's website quite extensively, and so I'm honored that you came on the show, and I appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you. It was very fun doing the interview with you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, and we'll have you on real soon. And for everyone out there, we'll be back next week, Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Blessings all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.